Hi, my name is Chloe Ramirez. Today I'm going to be going over contracts and nature of personal property and bailments. Starting off with contracts, I did want to state the 5 requirements for a valid contract. That's going to be mutual agreement, competent parties, consideration, lawful purpose, and proper form. Going into more detail of what these are, mutual agreement is going to be an offer and an acceptance. In the funeral industry, this would be somebody coming in for a pre-need and signing a contract with the funeral home to fulfill this pre-need and paying for it. An example, like going further into that example with the different kinds of the validities, the mutual agreement would be somebody coming into the funeral home and asking to be provided services for a pre-need and the funeral home accepting that. Competent parties would be just ensuring that everybody is aware and legally competent to make those decisions. For example, a licensed funeral director accepting the pre-need and going through the pre-need with somebody that is above 18 and legally competent, meaning can speak for themselves in the court of law, is not mentally insane, or like, for example, maybe a dementia patient that has been disregarded from being able to make their own decisions kind of situation. Now, consideration, this would be something like compensation or payment. So setting up a payment plan for a pre-need, just to ensure that it's a valid contract, or some kind of reimbursement. In the funeral setting, the only reimbursement is going to be money. And then lawful, obviously that nothing illegal is happening. Typically this isn't going to happen in the funeral setting, but for example, if I was trying to create a contract with somebody to carry marijuana across state lines, obviously that is not legal, so this would not be a part of a valid contract. In the funeral industry, if somebody were to ask me to, go against their power of attorney's wishes, or go against or somebody that is not the next of kin asking me to do something that they do not have authorization to do, would determine it unlawful, so that would not be a valid contract. And then lastly, proper form, meaning documentation. If I'm creating a contract for a pre-need with somebody, I would need paperwork stating that that is legal, and making sure that all of those things that I'm taking into consideration, like death certificates, if it's for a pre-need, we're not doing death certificates, but if we're doing a pre-need, things like signatures, payments, direct deposits, things like that, it has to be proper form, legally documented that this is the contract we're going to be carrying out, these are the terms, this is when it expires, and the parts of the contract. There are 4 different kinds of contracts. There's going to be express contracts, implied contracts, unilateral contracts, and bilateral contracts. The difference between the two I will go into here. Express contracts are going to be things that are laid out step by step, very detailed explanations of what is going to happen. For example, an at-need funeral service and planning it out. Everything is laid out, everything is written out, everything is contracted. And implied contracts are not spoken directly, but they're implied. Like, so for example, in the funeral industry, this would be a family provides you with clothing and you dress the decedent. It's not stated anywhere, it's not saying, yes, I need to dress the person, it's not written out, but it is implied that that is what you will do as a funeral director for the family during an at-need service. Then there's going to be unilateral contracts. This is going to be like one party promises something and the other accepts it by doing the task. So this is going to be like if a family says, I will pay you $1,000 extra if you can get my service done on Christmas Day, and you service them for Christmas Day. Lastly is a bilateral contract. This is when both sides make promises, and this is very simple, it's very common, just me, a funeral director, accepting your at-need service and taking it out for you, and you, an at-need client, needing your family to be serviced. The difference between a contract and an agreement is all contracts are agreements, but not all agreements are contracts. As stated in the Law for Business 19th edition, a contract is legally enforceable, includes things like the price list, service chosen, and signatures, but a agreement is essentially me stating that I will do something for you and doing it. So if a family says, I will stop by later for the clothes that I need to give you for my loved one, it's not something that's legally enforceable, but it's an agreement that you're making with each other that you're saying that you'll do. The difference between a contract and a quasi-contract is a contract is an agreement between two entities. So for example, a family asks for an at-need service and you provide that to them. That is a contract. Now, a quasi-contract is not really a contract at all, quasi meaning fake. A quasi-contract, an example of a quasi-contract would essentially be, let's say that you had a county case and no family came forward to claim the decedent, but as a funeral home, the hospital drops off this decedent and you provide a minimal service for them, an embalming and a 2-hour viewing with a doll-skin casket. Although nobody came forward to claim this person, it wouldn't be fair for the funeral home to just eat the cost. The city would pay for it, so you would be entitled to payment. So the law essentially treats quasi-contracts as contracts, but it's not legally a contract. I did want to explain the difference between tangible and intangible property. So tangible property are going to be things like cars, physical assets like maybe a china collection, a jewelry collection, pocketbook collection, things like that. Intangible assets and intangible personal property are going to be things like assets, 401ks, things that are not physically touchable. So another thing that's not physically touchable is like a company or a trademark, things like that. There are a couple different ways that you can acquire personal property. The first one, the most common, being purchasing, so through a sale of some kind. For an example in the funeral industry would be somebody purchasing a casket from a funeral home that is now their property or the decedent's property. You could be gifted something. My grandma gifting me a piece of jewelry for my birthday. Now that is my property, and that's with no expectation of payment. Relating that to the funeral industry would maybe a funeral home gifting a family a registry book for free due to some inconvenience or something like that without expecting payment. Then of course there is inheritance. Now this is really common in the funeral industry with wills and real estate and things like that. Inheriting personal property from a contract that was made prior. So if my grandma passed away and in her will she left me her whole jewelry collection, that would be a way of inheriting personal property. And then lastly, creation, and that would be creating personal property. So if I was creating jewelry as a business owner, or I guess in the funeral industry, if you maybe went through, if I was a business owner for a third party that created keepsakes out of ashes, creating those is creating personal property. Now getting into bailments, as stated in the Law for Business 19th edition book, a bailment is the delivery of property from one person to another. So from a bailer to the bailee. A bailer is somebody that is giving or delivering the property. The bailee is somebody who is accepting the property. An example of a bailment in the funeral industry would be the family being the bailer, delivering the decedent's clothing to the funeral director, which would then become the bailee. Another example of a bailment is going to be a bailment for the benefit of the bailee, the acceptor of personal property. An example of this would be a keepsake provider providing you free of charge with a display for keepsakes, benefiting you as the bailee. There are 3 types of bailments. There's going to be the benefit of the bailer, which is the benefit of the person who is delivering something. In the funeral industry, an example of this would be a family asking you to store personal items of the decedent for no cost to be returned. that is solely for the benefit of the bailer. The funeral home would have no benefit in that whatsoever. Lastly, there's going to be what's called the mutual benefit bailment, and this is going to be where there's compensation on both ends. This is the most common in business. In the funeral industry, a good example of this would be a family providing you the deceased's loved one's items, clothing that you're going to be dressing them in, and the funeral director or myself providing them with that service, dressing the body, putting the jewelry on the body. So they're paying for a service, I'm receiving compensation for this, and they're giving me property for this service, and I'm providing them the services that they paid for.